The Shadow Within, Part 6. As the group approached Jack's front door, they could feel something was wrong. His front door slightly cracked open, no lights on, a sense of dread overcame her. Sara quickly rushed into Jack's house. "Jack, are you okay?" Sara's fingers twitched, a faint echo of electricity dancing beneath her skin. She flexed her hand, attempting to dispel the sensation, but instead of subsiding, it burgeoned into a pronounced tingle that pricked along her nerves like the pattering of cold rain. Her gaze dropped to her arm, and a gasp escaped her lips as she beheld her flesh becoming a canvas for darkness. From her fingertips, an inky blackness unfurled, moving with sinister grace, tendrils of shadow weaving through her veins to her forearm. "Jack," Sara called out, her voice steady despite the fear constricting her throat. Jack's head snapped towards her, his body convulsing with tremors that seemed to stem from an internal quake. His hands were clenched into fists so tight that his knuckles blanched, and his breath came in short, sharp gasps. The air around him felt heavier, charged with a malevolent energy that radiated from his very core. "Something's wrong," Jack managed to grit out between shudders. "It's getting stronger." Sara approached cautiously, her own arm held up before her as if the spreading stain on her skin could offer some clue to Jack's torment. She knew the shadow being that plagued him was an enigma wrapped in darkness, a creature that feasted on the psyche and left only desolation in its wake. Michelle and Kevin did the only thing they could and watched in shock and horror. "Fight it, Jack," Sara urged, her voice imbued with a strength she scarcely felt. "Don't let it control you." Jack's chest heaved, his fight against the entity a silent war that etched lines of strain across his face. The struggle within him was palpable, a tempest of wills where he stood at the eye, besieged on all sides by the encroaching dark. "Can't. Hold it back," Jack whispered, a plea woven into the tremor of his words. Sara watched, heart pounding, as she tried to reconcile the man before her with the creature that sought to claim him. They were intertwined, Jack and the shadow, two halves of a whole that was both terrifying and pitiable. Her arm throbbed in time with his trembles, a sinister symphony that underscored their connection. Within her mind, Sara's thoughts circled like birds of prey, each one swooping down to snatch at fragments of understanding. She knew that the key to unraveling this nightmare lay in the shared bond between her and Jack, a link that was both their salvation and their curse. "Stay with me, Jack," Sara said, reaching out with her untainted hand in a gesture of solidarity. "We'll beat this. Together." The shadows on her arm writhed in response, as though mocking her determination with their silent, swirling dance. Yet, Sara refused to be intimidated, her resolve as unyielding as the steel that formed the backbone of her solitary existence. She would not cower before the darkness, nor would she allow Jack to be consumed by it. As Jack's body continued to shake, the air grew thick with the scent of an approaching storm, ozone and dread mingling in a potent brew. The shadow being was emerging, drawing strength from Jack's inner tumult, ready to cast its pall over everything they held dear. But Sara Livingston was no stranger to fighting battles alone, and she steeled herself for the conflict ahead. With grim determination etched on her features, she prepared to stand against the tide of darkness, her blue eyes blazing with an unwavering light that refused to be extinguished. Sara's heart hammered in her chest, the erratic pulse echoing the convulsions that tortured Jack's body. The shadow on her arm seemed to pulsate with a life of its own, a sinister twin to her own racing heartbeat. She lunged forward, her feet barely skimming the cold floor as she reached Jack's quivering form. "Jack," she cried out, her voice a lifeline thrown into the turbulent sea of his torment. "Focus on me, look at me." Her hands, one shadowed and one still flesh, gripped his shoulders, trying to anchor him to the present, to her. Sara's usual stoic demeanor cracked under the strain, revealing a flicker of fear in the depths of her steely blue eyes. "Stay with me," she pleaded, the words tumbling out amid the chaos. Jack's body stiffened suddenly, his back arching as if an invisible force was attempting to wrench his soul from within. And then, it happened. His eyes, those deep-set wells that once held a spark of mischievous charm, now turned as dark as the abyss that threatened to swallow him whole. The transformation was swift, leaving Sara staring into two orbs of pure midnight. "Jack?" Her whisper was a mix of disbelief and dread. The sight sent a shiver down her spine, the kind that spoke of ancient fears buried in the primal corners of the mind. Despite the terror clawing at her thoughts, she pushed it away, locking it in a cage built from years of solitude and reinforced by necessity. These eyes were not Jack's, they were windows to the void where the shadow being resided, peering out with malevolent curiosity. "Fight it, Jack. You're stronger than it." Sara's voice carried the command of someone who had faced darkness alone and emerged unbroken. Her fingers tightened around his shoulders, nails digging in through the fabric of his shirt, willing her strength into his battle. Inside, she waged her own war against the creeping tendrils of doubt. Could she really help Jack? Was their connection the key or simply another trick played by the entity that seemed to feed on their despair? But no, Sara would not allow herself to succumb to such thoughts, not when Jack needed her most. "Look at me, Jack," she demanded, shaking him gently. "Don't let it take you. I'm here, we're in this together." Jack's lips parted, but the voice that emerged was not entirely his, a guttural echo that sent chills down Sara's arm, wrapping around the shadow there like a constricting snake. The shadow being was close, too close, and yet Sara held firm, her gaze locked on the black mirrors of Jack's eyes, searching for a glimmer of the man she knew. "Come back to me, Jack." Her voice softened, a contrast to the steel in her grip. "You're not alone." As the darkness churned within him, so too did the determination within Sara, forging a bond between them that the shadow could not sever. She would stand sentinel over his fractured spirit until the light returned to his eyes, or until the shadows claimed them both. Sara's arm throbbed with a cold fire, the shadow's inky tendrils etching themselves deeper into her flesh as if it sought to claim her very bones. She could feel the chill of it spreading, and yet there was a burn behind her eyes that spoke not of fear but of an unyielding resolve. Jack's transformation before her was a grotesque ballet of shadows, his limbs jerking spasmodically as the entity within vied for dominion. "Jack," she insisted, her voice a blade cutting through the thickening gloom of the room. "Tell me about the night you first met this thing. What happened?" He writhed, gasping as though the words she demanded were being torn from his soul. It was like being submerged in liquid night," he stammered, the pitch black of his eyes swirling with a storm of trapped constellations. "I stumbled upon a clearing during a hike, and the stars. They fell away, leaving only darkness. The shadow being, it entered me then," a whisper turned to a scream. "Was I there? Did you see me?" Sara asked, even as a pulse of dread echoed through her at the thought of their destinies entwined by this malevolent force. "Why, yes," Jack replied, his body convulsing as he fought for control over his own vocal cords. "You stood at the edge of the clearing, bathed in moonlight. I shouldn't have let you go, Sara. Should have spared you of the burden of this life. I messed up, so careless." "Let me go?" Sara repeated confused, her heart pounding against her ribcage like a caged bird. Jack's regret was a palpable thing, a weight she felt pressing on her chest. She thought that maybe he believed himself to be her inadvertent jailer, the one who had anchored her to this path of darkness. "Jack, listen to me." Her hands clasped his face, forcing him to focus on her despite the turmoil inside him. "We can't change the past, only what we do now. Together, we can fight this." His struggle eased momentarily, a fragile peace settling over his features. It was enough to give her hope, a fleeting moment in which she saw the real Jack Hartman, a man fighting for redemption amidst a sea of shadows. A man who, despite everything, cared deeply for her well-being, even if it meant bearing the weight of guilt that should never have been solely his to carry. "Saving me wasn't your responsibility then, and it isn't now," she whispered fiercely, almost willing him to grasp onto the lifeline she extended. "We save each other or not at all." As the words left her lips, Sara felt the shadow within her arm pulse angrily, as if provoked by her defiance. But it did not matter. For now, she had reached him, and in the battle against encroaching darkness, every small victory was a treasure hoarded against the night. Sara's gaze was locked on the creeping darkness that slithered up her arm like an inky serpent, its touch colder than the grave. Her skin prickled with each movement, and a chill ran down her spine, a ghostly whisper of unease that echoed in the recesses of her mind. What arcane connection tethered her to Jack, allowing this malevolent entity to seep into her very flesh? "Remember, Sara." Jack's voice, ragged with strain, cut through her thoughts. "It knows fear. It feeds off it." His plea was a jolt back to the present, to the room that felt more like a cage with every passing second. Jack stood before her, a battle playing out within his body as if it were a battleground for his soul. She could see the tremors that racked him, the way his knuckles whitened as he gripped at whatever invisible force sought to overpower him. Jack, what is it trying to do to us? Sarah's words were steady, despite the panic that fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird. It wants control, he grunted between clenched teeth. The shadow being snaked its presence deeper, whispering venomous intent that only Jack could hear. She watched as his eyes, usually so expressive and warm, turned cold and black as void. They were windows to a soul under siege, revealing a glimpse of the endless abyss that now threatened to consume him whole. The transformation sent a shiver through her, a stark reminder of the gravity of their plight. "Fight it, Jack. You're stronger than it," she urged, stepping closer despite the danger. But the shadow being was relentless, gnawing away at Jack's resolve, stoking flames of anger he struggled to contain. "You don't understand," he spat, a growl lacing his words. "It's always there, lurking, waiting for a crack to slither through. I can feel it. Clawing at my mind. Let me help," she pleaded, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Help?" Jack laughed bitterly, a sound that was more a sob than mirth. "What can you do against darkness incarnate?" Sarah's mind whirred, frantically sifting through fragments of memories, searching for a clue, any thread that might weave together the tapestry of their entwined fates. The shadow being was not just a parasite, it was a cunning predator, one that seemed intimately familiar with their deepest fears. The thought made her blood run cold. "Think, Sara." Her inner voice was a whip crack of urgency. Every encounter, every shared moment with Jack, it all mattered. The pieces were there, scattered across the canvas of their experiences, waiting to be assembled into a weapon they could wield. "Jack, remember the forest? The night we saw the stars align?" she asked, her voice a lifeline thrown into the endless sea of his torment. "Too well," he hissed, his body shaking as if in a seizure, the shadow's influence a poison coursing through his veins. She needed to keep him anchored, tethered to something other than the darkness that sought to claim him. Focus on that night. We were together, and we were strong. We can be that again. We have to be. The shadow writhed within him, a manifestation of malice that would not easily relinquish its hold. Yet, despite its grip, Jack's eyes flickered with something that looked like hope, or perhaps defiance, a sign that the man she knew was still there, fighting to emerge from beneath the suffocating veil of the shadow being. "Stay with me, Jack," she whispered, her own determination a steadfast flame against the encroaching dark. "We'll find a way through this. Together." Sarah's hand found Jack's trembling one, her fingers wrapping around his wrist with a firmness that belied the chaos unfurling within him. The cool touch of her skin was a stark contrast to the feverish heat emanating from his own. "Look at me, Jack," she urged, her voice cutting through the dark haze of his mind like a beacon. His gaze, now void of pitch-black despair, met hers, and for an instant, the sinister tide seemed to recede. "I'm trying," he gasped, each word a shard of glass in his throat. "But it's so strong." "Then we'll be stronger," Sara stated resolutely, as if the force of her conviction alone could banish the shadow. "We've faced darkness before. We're not strangers to fighting back." Around them, the room had become a flurry of activity. The others, their faces taut with concern and determination, moved with purposeful haste. A coil of rope, a chair sturdy enough to bear the struggle that was sure to come, and the glint of metal, scissors, perhaps, to cut lengths of binding, were gathered with silent efficiency. "Forgive us, Jack," one of them murmured, the regret heavy in their voice. But there was no choice. Not now. Not when every second they hesitated was a second the shadow grew stronger. "Stay with us, Jack," Sara coaxed, her thumb stroking the back of his hand, even as the others began to secure his limbs. "Think of the light we found in each other, even in the darkest woods. Hold on to that." The ropes bit into his flesh, a necessary cruelty to contain the violence brewing beneath his skin. Jack winced but did not protest. He knew, as they all did, that this was the only way to keep the monster at bay. To keep it from claiming him entirely. And to keep Sara safe, the woman who dared to stand by him even as the abyss gazed back. "Is this going to work?" The doubt crept into her thoughts unbidden. Yet even as she questioned, she fortified her resolve with memories of their shared resilience. They were more than the sum of their fears, they were the embodiment of hope against the encroaching night. "Whatever happens," Sara whispered, her voice a soft promise amidst the tightening knots, "we won't let go. Not until you're free, Jack. Not until we've driven this thing out." Jack's breath hitched, his blackened eyes searching hers for something solid to cling to, a lifeline in the roiling sea of his own unraveling self. There was pain in those depths, and a plea for salvation that Sara felt etched into her very soul. "We're here, Jack," she affirmed, pressing her forehead to his. "And we'll fight. Every step. Together." In the dimly lit room where shadows seemed to claw at the walls, Jack's body convulsed with a savagery that made the very air thicken with dread. His arms strained against the ropes, muscles bulging and veins standing out like dark rivers on his skin. "Let me go." The voice that erupted from Jack was guttural, barely human, as if the shadow being itself had learned to speak through his lips. It twisted his features into a grotesque mask of rage. Sara's heart hammered against her rib cage. She could almost feel the malevolence spilling from Jack, yet her gaze remained steady, locked onto his. "You're stronger than it, Jack," she said, her voice a steel thread in the midst of chaos. "Fight it." He bucked against his restraints, a snarl contorting his face. The lamps flickered as if in response to his escalating fury, casting the room in a sickly pulse of light. Each outburst seemed to sap more of his humanity, leaving something darker in its wake. "He's slipping away," Sara thought, wincing as Jack let out a guttural roar that echoed off the walls, filled with the pain and torment of the battle raging inside him. "I can't lose him to this darkness. Look at me, Jack." She grasped his face, forcing him to meet her piercing blue eyes, which held an unwavering resolve. "Remember who you are. Remember the man who fought so hard to keep this evil at bay." Jack's pitch-black eyes bore into hers, and for a moment, the veil of darkness lifted, revealing the barest hint of brown, the color they once were. His lips quivered, a silent battle waged behind his gaze. Then, with a shudder that ran through his entire frame, the blackness reclaimed him. "Useless," he spat, the shadow's venom dripping from his tongue. "You can't save me, Sara. No one can." Sara's jaw clenched, but her hands remained gentle upon his face. Her own fears threatened to swallow her whole, yet she pushed them aside, focusing instead on the man before her. "No," she silently vowed, "I will not let fear win." "Maybe I can't, Jack," she replied, her throat tight with emotion. "But we can. Together." "Liars!" Jack thrashed under the constraints, his voice laced with the shadow's influence. "Deceivers all." "Shh, listen to my voice, Jack," Sara urged, her tone soft but insistent. "You're not alone in this. We're going to pull you back from this abyss. You have to trust me." His chest heaved, and for a fleeting second, the aggression faltered, his expression one of helpless desperation. Sara could see the glimmer of the real Jack Hartman, fighting for control amid the tempest. "Stay with me, Jack," she implored, tracing her thumb across his sweat-slicked forehead. "We won't give up. Not now, not ever." The room seemed to hold its breath as Jack's eyes fluttered closed, his body slumping against the restraints. The shadow being recoiled momentarily, and in that precious respite, Sara's spirit swelled with hope. "Keep fighting, Jack," she whispered fiercely. "For both of us." Continue the story with Part 7. Don't forget to like and subscribe.